Warning, this episode may contain content that is not suitable for children. Viewer discretion is advised.
Some of our viewers may have heard of the extreme Jesuit oath.
I mean, the one line really kind of, stands out there in the middle. It's like, do furthermore promise and declare that I will, when opportunity presents, make and wage relentless war secretly or openly against all heretics, Protestants, and liberals, as I am directed to.
And it was very scandalous in that it showed a lot of duplicitous means that they would use to advance their cause and obtain means for the order. And so it was very much a scandal for the order, and as well as this extreme oath, but it was very violent in talking about attacking and killing people, and
it's pretty gory.
Yeah. It might be too hot for YouTube.
Yeah.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to LED Live. Today we have James Bowen with us. I would say he's quite the walking encyclopedia when it comes to biblical history. He also runs the YouTube channel Biblical Hope. And today he is here to talk about the Jesuits, which is basically the special forces of the Roman Catholic Church and the Vatican. If you're into New World Order and these groups, the elites that run the world, stick around. And if you think we're crazy, you should stick around too, because I believe by the end of this episode, you'll be convinced there's something more happening behind the scenes. James, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today. So, in case there's any doubt in your mind as to whether or not the Jesuits actually are in power today or how popular they are, let's take a look.
Simply put, this country and this world benefit from your commitment to Jesuit principles, to being men.
As a graduate of another great Jesuit institution, Xavier University, I have great affection for the value and purpose of a Jesuit education.
Wow.
Yeah, there's no question. That's for those of you who don't know, that's House Speaker John Boehner back in the day. And obviously a very much a fan of the Jesuits, but
before deepfakes, right?
Right. Yeah. And in 2016 there was a movie released called Silence. You guys might have heard about it. I think they had Andrew Garfield in it, the same fellow who played in
he did that after he did the whole
Hacksaw
Desmond
Ridge
Doss film.
Yeah, exactly. And it popularized a couple of Jesuits, and there was one scene in particular that caught my mind, and it reminds me of the crucifixion in some ways.
They were given sake, as the Roman soldier offered vinegar to the dying Christ. I prayed they remembered our Lord's suffering and took courage and comfort from it.
So they were definitely portraying their members as martyrs for the cause.
So this is a movie about Jesuits.
Yeah, so this particular movie, Silence, they were portraying a couple of Jesuits over in Japan. And we're going to take a look at some of the history of that here in just a moment. But some of our viewers may have heard of the extreme Jesuit oath. It was part of the Library of Congress due to some political struggles that took place back in 1912 between Eugene Bonniwell and Thomas Butler, and this oath was brought to light. There have been many people that have claimed that it was a forgery based off of some forgeries from a fellow by the name of Robert Ware, and it was classed with another document called the Secreta Monita that was the secret instructions of the Jesuits. This second document right here was originally discovered in the Jesuits College of Paderborn, Westphalia, in a cupboard in the rector's room, and a second copy in the city of Prague in 1611. Now, Gretzer, one of the Jesuits, affirmed that the Monita was a forgery, and the problem is later on there was a work found in the British Museum tucked away from 1596, 20 years before the alleged forgery, in which the Secreta Monita is copied. And it was very scandalous in that it showed a lot of duplicitous means that they would use to advance their cause and obtain means for the order. And so it was very much a scandal for the order, and as well as this extreme oath. And I'm not going to read all of this here because I'm just going to challenge the viewer to maybe take a look and see what kind of what kind of means they would promote but it was very violent and talking about, attacking and killing people. And
it's pretty gory.
Yeah, it might be too hot for YouTube.
Yeah. I mean, the one line really kind of, stands out there in the middle. It's like, do furthermore promise and declare that I will, when opportunity presents, make and wage relentless war secretly or openly against all heretics, Protestants, and liberals, as I am directed to.
The first time I ever heard of the Jesuits was actually when I read the book, The Great Controversy, which is really just a historical piece. Like this author, Ellen White, she quotes historians. This is not her own agenda or ideas or anything. And many people have been blessed by it, including me. And that's where these historians describe as the Jesuits were put into place to counter the Reformation that was happening, right? The Martin Luthers, the Zwinglis, the John Wesley, all those people who stepped up and shared the truth of whatever the Roman Catholic Church is teaching is not biblical. And the Jesuits came in and secretly mingled with the Protestants, joined their churches to then counter it.
Yeah, I got into an argument recently with a Catholic over the matter because he was trying to show from ChatGPT that, he was asking ChatGPT, is the Jesuit oath real? And of course, ChatGPT was trying to say, well, it's inconsistent with Jesuit teachings and not representative of what Rome taught. But to that end, let's take a look at some of those documents. This is the Pontificale Romanum, and it contained in it the abbot's oath. You can see the connection here to Clement VIII and Urban VIII as well. And one of the parts of the abbot's oath was, I swear that heretics and schismatics and rebels to our Lord, the Lord Pope or his successors, I will to the extent of my power persecute and beat down. Propose persecuar and impugnabo.
Okay, so the Lord is the Pope.
Well, that was part of canon law and Distinction 96 of Decretums Gratiani, the Decretals of Gratian. But, you got to remember the context. Back in the day when the Jesuit oath was released, there were a lot of people that were legitimately concerned about what Catholics were wanting for America. For example, in the Catholic Register, we read, there is no crime that the doting warrior charges against us to which we must not plead guilty. He says that we are trying to make the United States a Catholic country. We are most certainly are doing all in our power to accomplish it.
Wow. Yeah. And look at who is running the judicial system now, right? All of the what do you call them? The
Senate?
The Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, the judges are Catholic in a nation that was founded as a Protestant nation. Why? Because they were fleeing the persecution that was happening in Europe, where millions of Christians died because they would not recant their Protestant beliefs. And the Catholic Church was forcing them to, well, you either got to believe our beliefs, which were based in paganism. I'm sorry to say it, but that's the reality of it. It was paganism that got mixed with Christianity. And the Christians said, we're coming to the United States, and look at the United States right now. It's turning Catholic.
Yeah, in the Western Watchman, they said that the church has persecuted. Only a tyro in church history will deny that. And they went on further and stated that, she gives no bonds that such things will not occur again. So they were very bold in their idea that, the church has persecuted. We may do it again if we feel threatened. And there were encouragements entered into the congressional record from like the Detroit Journal, where when the church needed armed men to enlist as crusaders, the young men of the church shouldered the muskets and saber and obeyed the orders of the church. When the church wanted to get rid of the Saracens, the faithful rose en masse and extinguished them. The church may have to call on you to defend her rights in this country. And I know that the young men will obey the church and take up arms to exterminate the enemies of the Roman Catholic Church.
What a lot of people don't know is that the Roman Catholic Church in the Vatican was a political system.
Yeah,
They were ruling over kings. Kings bowed down to the Pope. It was due to the French Revolution that the Pope was removed in 1798. And that's when the Pope was removed, and it became just a religious institution. But you know how many Christians are out there saying, like, no, we want to have a church and state combined system again. That's dangerous. And you see why.
And I'll just add that we see actually heads of each country going before the Pope and kneeling and kissing his ring. So he's still in control of all of it.
And why are they not doing that to any other Protestant pastor? Nobody. The Protestant pastors are going to the Pope as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were calls to organize into secret societies and give them military training and whatnot. This was Pope Leo the 13th, quoted in the Christian July 1914. But really, this kind of organization and military force and coercion, it was really something that began a long time ago. And, one of the things that I read from this book, The Great Controversy, is that in the 13th century was established the most terrible engine of the papacy, the Inquisition. And, there were many things about the Inquisition, I think, that are being downplayed today. But if you go back to like the Inquisitor's Manual itself from Nicholas Americh, this was one of the propositions on page 199, that the whole city must be burnt on account of the heretics who live in it. Whoever pleases may seize and kill any heretics. How do you guys think that compares to what Christ did in Luke 9? Do you guys remember the disciples came, there was a city that rejected him, and they were like, hey, can we call down fire and burn the city? And what did Christ do? He turned and rebuked them and said, you know not what manner of spirit you are of. Is Nicholas Americh, is the Catholic Church's Inquisition manual, is it matching the same spirit of Christ in Luke 9?
I think the dangerous thing is when somebody has so much power that they're able to define more and make all the definitions. We say who the heretics are. And you look at the Jesuit oath, isn't there? We're going to persecute all heretics, Protestants. You've just said all of them are heretics. So that's setting a very dangerous precedent, because then they're the ones that make all the decisions about, who lives and who dies. And you look at church history, ancient church history, that's a very, I don't want to say it. That's a very, it's not a very comforting place to be for everybody else, the ones who aren't in power, so to speak.
And who aren't abiding by their beliefs.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no freedom of thought.
Yeah, at this time, around the time of the Reformation, the Order of the Jesuits was created, the most cruel, unscrupulous, and powerful of all the champions of popery. Cut off from every earthly tie and human interest, dead to the claims of natural affection, reason, and conscience, holy silence. They knew no rule, no tie but that of their order. And we're going to take a look here. Occult Theocracy by Lady Queensborough indicates that the Jesuits were ultimately involved in the Inquisition because it was Ignatius Loyola himself who procured its erection in Portugal in 1545 to 46. Yeah. So they were very much involved. In fact, if you go to the Chiesa del Gesù in Rome today, there's an allegorical statue of Mary casting out Huss and Luther. And so they were very much involved in countering the Reformation and trying to put a halt on that. Their story, though, began back much earlier to Ignatius Loyola himself. He was born Inigo Lopez and Loyola in the castle of Loyola. He was a colorful character, brash, unruly, and easily offended. He was born to a wealthy family. The police records of the day said that he was kind of a violent and vindictive fellow. It's kind of interesting to see, though, how he's portrayed today. Very different from what the historical record indicates. He's very much popularized, and you can take a look at that right here.
Pamplona is lost, Loyola. I say we fight.
He wants to become a pilgrim. He wants to go to Jerusalem and beg his way there like the holy pilgrims of old.
But he's a Loyola. What will people say?
If you could hear the voice of God, would you want to keep it secret?
You know what this council is capable of. Do you really want to die?
So that council right there was actually the Inquisition. He himself was brought up on trial for being part of the Alumbrados, which was the Illuminati at that time. But what happened is, early on in that siege of Pamplona, his leg was shattered by a cannonball, and ultimately his dreams of a warrior kind of ceased. And so he found himself going to the mountains of Montserrat to visit an image. And this is the monastery that's now there in Montserrat. It's very, gilded, I guess would be the term to describe it. But he spent 3 days in confession, an entire night before this Black Madonna statue, and committed himself to Mary. He went off to Jerusalem to conquer for Christ what the Crusades failed to do. He thought he was going to do himself. So it kind of shows his self-esteem, if you will. He
just became a different kind of warrior.
Yeah, exactly. And he couldn't go ultimately, so he ended up staying at Manresa. And in Manresa, he spent 10 months in a cave, and in exhaustion had dreams and visions. And he had many fanciful dreams. He saw lights flashing. He believed he chased Satan like a dog with a whip. And but later on, in 1534, him and 6 others, mostly of Castilian origin, all students of the University of Paris, met in Montmartre outside of Paris and pronounced promises of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Now, there were some things that took place in his history, very much occult in practice. He was said to have some occult powers such as levitation and, other stuff that was supernatural. But, guys, is supernatural levitation, is that evidence of truth?
No. By sola scriptura is one of the statements that came out of the Reformation, which means by the scriptures and the scriptures alone. And the scriptures do not approve of any of that or prove that any of this is biblical,
One of the interesting stories, if you go back in history, is it's an apocryphal act of Peter that Simon Magus himself was said to have levitated by the assistance of demons, and Peter kneeled down and prayed, and then Simon Magus fell down and died. It was supposedly a legend or story that took place, but that act of levitation alone, the early church allegedly faced problems like that as well, that were not in origin from the true gospel, but the Satan trying to manifest himself. And I say allegedly because the apocryphal Acts of Peter, there's some discussion over what's truth and what's error there. But in time, he was accepted by the Pope and confirmed through the bull Regimini Militantis Ecclesiae. And you've got a copy of it right there. He was sworn to the Pope and given all sorts of powers to excommunication, to aid the society, to confirm, exercise, and dispense plenary indulgences, all sorts of power. And initially, early on, they first proved themselves in the hospitals, very kind of humble-like, which gave the presumption or the look of piety, if you will. Mm-hmm. It reminds me of another fellow.
So the perspective that I came to from medicine was always very much involved with the person, as opposed to the disease that happens to be in a person. It really goes way back in my training of service for others, but with the very strong theme of intellectual rigor and integrity and honesty, which again, it's something that I didn't deliberately choose it. It was there from almost the minute I was born with my parents, and then the idea of going into a long period of education under the Jesuits was just very natural to get me to where I am today.
Do you guys know about that with Fauci?
I did not know that about him, but I know that in the lodges, the Freemasons, as well as the Jesuits, that's their first move, is to go into the community and do community work to get a reputation of kindness and goodness, not only so that they can have that kind of disguise under everything they're doing, but also to kind of get their, get information usually.
I find it really interesting because I'm sure some people will bring up, well, look at the Pope. He is a Jesuit Pope, and look how much good he does. But that is literally how the Jesuits were established. Like you were saying, they were infiltrating the education system. Mm-hmm. They were infiltrating churches. They were supposed to look like pious on the outside so that you will be deceived. Yeah. Right. And doesn't the Bible say, be aware of lions in sheepskin? Right. And that's the exact thing. And the same thing with Jonathan Rumi, who plays Jesus in The Chosen, who is a Jesuit. And if you look at our documentary that we have on our YouTube channel for free about The Chosen, you'll see that he admits to also be a Knights Templar, which is on par with a 33rd degree Freemason. So look it up.
Yeah, these guys were known also, though, for some fanaticism. So Xavier, one of the early Jesuits, was requested by one of the patients to scrape out an abscess, and he felt rather squeamish about it. So he put his hand, which was covered in the purulent matter, to his mouth in order to put his self-control to the extreme test. So it was this idea of just like crafting the will into total submission. And there were other stories of them, laying down in the bed of a man who had pediculosis, who was covered with vermin. All sorts of extreme things that were taking place. I don't ever hear, I've never read a story about any of the Gospels or early church or Christ doing such extreme things, Like that wasn't the kind of faith practices they had or healing practices. They established schools. So there were schools that they used to educate the masses in scores of languages in India and Japan. At first, only 60 of them were allowed, but later on, with the Bull Exposit Debitum of Julius III in 1550, they ended up having more of them come in. They became the teachers of the people. Matteo Ricci is a prime example of how they infiltrated the court system. And, ultimately, there was a lot of impact that they had with the Counter-Reformation. And these were 3 Jesuits that were heavily involved. You've got Alcazar, Francisco Ribera, and Manuel Lacunza. Alcazar being the one to really bring in preterism, and Lacunza and Ribera definitely Futurism. And one of the things that I find interesting is the Venido de Messias in Gloria y Majestad was actually written under a pen name of a Jew, Juan Josephat Ben Ezra, as a means of getting it sold better. And ultimately downstream, this kind of theology about the eschatological idea of futurism was brought through Darby and some of the other Protestants to America, and it's now taught at the Dallas Theological Seminary today.
So could you explain, for those who don't know, what is preterism, what is futurism?
Right. So preterism is the idea that all of the events of Revelation have already happened way in the ancient past, that, the Antichrist, that was all Nero, and it all happened 2,000 years ago. And futurism is this idea that all of that about Antichrist and everything is yet in the future, and it's all set in the future, long time down the road. And really both views were proposed because both of them took equal distraction or equal heat off of Rome from Protestants' idea of historicism, which identified the Catholicism and the Pope as Antichrist. And so it was very effective for them to get Protestants distracted and off of what they were originally believed.
So I find it really interesting that we can see the ideologies and the beliefs of the Vatican having seeped into today's Protestantism. Because how many people do you hear today who say, that are, in certain denominations or most denominations that say, the Antichrist is the Vatican. But think about it. If you are part of the Methodist Church or part of the Lutheran Church, Martin Luther was saying this, right? Mm-hmm. And John Wesley was saying this. All of these individuals out of which these church denominations came said, this is the Antichrist. But you don't hear it today anymore, right? But why? Because the Jesuits came in and said, let's distract them. Let's come up with other theological ideas so that I think it's in the past or in the future, and it's not us.
Yeah, Revelation warns about this system that would deal in the souls of men. And, one of the things that I found sad was in Paraguay, the establishment of the reductions there, the Jesuit plan of training and evangelization that took place, whether they intentionally desired it or not, involved keeping the Indians in as much ignorance as possible. But slavery was never inconsistent with Catholic principles. In 1866, Pope Pius IX himself declared that slavery, considered as such in its essential nature, is not at all contrary to the natural and divine law, and there can be several just titles of slavery, and these are referred to by approved theologians and commentators of the sacred canons. So it is very sad that the sort of bondage that took place.
When you talk about the sacred canons, this is the tradition, the forefathers of the Catholic Church that you can't actually refute. When they say tradition, they're like, it must be tradition and the Bible or whatever, but they never go directly off of the Bible or anything else.
And in practice, they put tradition over the Bible.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, you know, part of the secret to their power was how they got involved with the kings and rulers of the world. Louis XV was a homosexual. His confessor was a Jesuit. And it was through the means of the confessional that they became able to know the secrets of state, but also be able to wield those with power to hold it as a sort of leverage and manipulate the rulers of the world. So they had
like manipulate him because he was gay, and he didn't want people to know.
Well, I'm not going to make something there that I can't explicitly that I can't support from the writings, but think about the kind of power if you're having whatever secret sin in your life,
right,
that you're confessing to someone else, and they have, then they have means to leverage it and, do whatever they want with it. It creates a really powerful, system there that's very dangerous.
Yeah.
They were founded, though, upon this sort of structure where you had Jesuit individuals who would answer to a provincial, and then superiors who would answer to the general in this order right here. And part of this was predicated upon the idea of having all of one's failures or imperfections being reported and denounced to the superiors. So you could never trust anybody. It was this way of reporting on your fellow Jesuit. And it created a structure where the top general kind of knew about everything that was going on. And, to me, it kind of reminds me of the devil, his role to be an accuser of the brethren.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he would want as part of his structure. And that's what I find in what they teach.
It works very well if you're at the top.
And, a lot of people see a lot of the Jesuits out there as, good, kind men that what could be wrong with this society? But you got to understand that there's a lot of different levels. You have novices, scholastics, temporals, coadjutors, professors of 3 vows, 4 vows, and then the masters. And it takes a lifetime to get to the master level. And it's set up in such a way so that they can hold a front to the world and not be known for what really goes on behind the scenes. In Guri's doctrine of the Jesuits, the general himself usually stood towards the Pope much as a powerful grand feudatory of the Middle Ages did towards a weak titular Lord Paramount. So the Jesuit general himself is very, very powerful. In the 17th century, Bersonius said that our Father General, as all know, governs Rome itself and the popedom. We make war at our pleasure betwixt one prince and another, between a prince and his subjects, usurp dominion over cities and countries, fearing no discovery of our actions, since our commerce is chiefly with great men. We know every public secret and can in singular way dispatch heretics and enemies of the Roman court.
Ooh, this is how political campaigns are run. This is completely the Hegelian dialectic right there.
What is that?
Oh my goodness. It's basically using both parties that are running and all the people who are for or against their motives and mixing it, like he's saying, making war with each other so that there's anger and there's heated feelings on both sides, so that you get everyone
pushing
agitated.
Everybody to a direction that you want to push them, which is towards the middle.
Yeah.
And then you have the solution.
Yeah.
And the solution is not really what everybody else wants. It's what the person who's crafted the whole war, it's their solution, but so that they wind up in control.
It's through strife, though. You have to create it through strife.
Yeah, this is the general today. This man holds a lot of power. His name's Arturo Sosa.
No, this is the Black Pope. Correct?
Yes. This is the Jesuit general today.
What does it mean, the Black Pope?
You have the white one, which is set out to be the kind, again, loving man who's in the Vatican.
Francis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you have this guy who's actually pulling all the puppet strings of the white Pope and the Vatican and everybody else in the world, and the propaganda that's being, I guess, brought up.
It's interesting. Nobody really hears about this guy.
Mm-hmm.
Of course not.
Yeah, he's hidden.
So the other one is the face, and this guy is actually the
commander.
Oh, interesting.
If you're in a secret society, you don't talk about it.
Yeah, you're
It's
not
like,
supposed to
It's
know.
like Fight Club. You know, the first rule of Fight Club is we don't talk about Fight Club.
Yeah.
Right. It's the same thing with Skull and Bones and all those guys. It's like, if you're a part of it, you don't talk about it.
Right.
Yeah, one of the things that happened is it arrived at such a height that the Italian Acquaviva became Father General. He gave his hand to be kissed as the Pope his toe. So you had to show deference to the general. And Father Dosa blasphemously preached that in the last days God hath spoken to us by his son Ignatius, by whom he hath appointed heir of all things, by whom also he made the world.
Wow. Making Ignatius Loyola Jesus is what they're saying. That's blasphemy, like you said.
They became such a political problem all over Europe. There were pictures like this of the Pope, fanning the flames that burned down London and starting fires in every country, being involved in things. The rulers of Europe got so sick of it that they eventually kicked them out of Paris, Portugal, and Spain. And
I think they were also kicked out of Japan. Now, don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure that they tried to kick out all of the foreigners, and there was pressure being put. Your dad told me about this. There was pressure being put on them to let them back in because the Jesuits wanted to come back in.
Yeah, and in 1762, we can see right here that there was a denouncement in the hostile press, and in 1767, there were secret orders to be open at sunrise, where all the members of the Society of Jesus from Charles' Spanish domains and confiscating all their goods, they wanted all of them removed. And the closing sentence read, if a single Jesuit, even though sick or dying, is still be found in the area under your command after the embarking, prepare yourself to face summary execution. So Europe was like so tired of
Sick
all
of
the
it.
intrigue. They were done.
That's why they didn't want him in America, too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And ultimately, they were suppressed under Pope Clement XIV, who issued a suppression in his Dominus ac Redemptor Noster right here. And it wasn't long, though, before they were revived. And Pope Pious VII put the Jesuits back into power. He was the same pope in the smallpox crisis. So they almost had like a massive pandemic in their day. And that was one of the things that happened at that time as well, as the Jesuits came back into power. I just found that kind of coincidental and interesting. But there were people in the United States who knew about the dangers of this order, and John Adams was not happy about the rebirth. He was really concerned that it would be a threat to religious liberty, but nevertheless recognized that we offered principles of religious liberty here in the United States, and so there wasn't anything that was going to be done about it. But one of the things that really concerns me is what these folks actually believed. For example, this creed right here, I believe in two gods, one is son, father, and mother metaphorically. And he goes on, mother, father may be equally attributed to God and the Blessed Virgin as if they were both hermaphrodites.
Ooh.
So it doesn't look particularly well. And this was a copy of that creed from Alfonso Vargas Toletani right here, and you can read it in the original Latin there. They were known to be involved in idolatry, witchcraft, and carrying images in ways that were not acceptable. And one of the things that I want to point out here in Ignatius of Loyola's spiritual exercises as well is this principle that is a Jesuit axiom right here, que lo blanco que lo veo, creer que es el negro. And, what I see as white, I will believe is black if the hierarchy of the church so declares it to be.
Right.
So you had to turn over everything in your mind. You could not offer any kind of reason, no reasoning powers that you could retain. You had
like
to turn
zombies.
it all. Exactly.
Right. If they say that the sky is red, you must say the sky is red.
Yeah, the Jesuit axiom was perende ac cadaver. It was the idea of being a corpse. Yeah. So, in the spiritual exercises, one of the things that I find is a certain element of coldness. For example, separating himself from all friends and acquaintances when this was going on. There were stories told about Xavier and some of the early Jesuits, how sometimes they would pass, in their lifetime, like a few miles away from loved ones on their journey to another country, but they would not even stop and go and visit their loved ones because they were on a mission and they wouldn't even take the time. It was just basically you're supposed to get cold from any sort of love or rational emotion.
If you're dead.
Wow.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder if there's a certain personality type that's drawn to that.
Like a narcissistic?
Yeah, that, you know, the person that desires power, a person that can easily cut off other people, has no love for them, no earthly ties, none of that. I mean, that's just now. I mean, humanity's broken, but even in our brokenness, it doesn't seem normal. We would call that unhealthy.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that they had was these breath prayers where you would focus on a particular word and repeat it over and over and breathe while you're doing it. Yeah, exactly. You know, kind of shutting down your frontal lobe, your ability to think and process,
right?
And just like self-hypnosing yourself. And
so it's meditation in Eastern, what do they call it?
Eastern mysticism.
That's right.
Yeah. And, you know, they were very much pantheistic as well, thinking about God in the plants and vegetation. Likewise, making a temple of me, being created in the likeness and image of his divine majesty, and believing that Christ or God was in all things. So it was very similar to Eastern religions, exactly. And you can find some similarities there in some of the concepts here. For example, astrological healing, certain things there that you might find in the East. But they have definitely a connection to Hollywood in some ways as well. Athanasius Kircher and the Magic Lantern. You can find evidence of his testing and working on the principles of that, as well as things like surround sound. So if you think about how, you know, theater is today, its origins are rooted in the Jesuits, in what they studied. Now, are you guys ready to get into some documents, some pretty scary documents?
Let's do it.
Okay. Yeah. So this is the Cardinal, Jesuit Sir Robert Bellarmine, very famous in Catholicism, respected Cardinal. And one of the things that I found interesting was in speaking about Luther, Luther said, you know, the church never burned anybody. And his response was that proves Luther's either ignorance or impudence, because the church put an infinite number to death, and they were burned to death, and either Luther didn't know about it or he was ignorant. And he goes further and he says that, you know, some people say like experience shows that terror is not useful. He says, I reply, experience proves the contrary, for the Donatists, Manichaeans, and Albigenses were routed and annihilated by arms. So I got a question. Is terrorism how we advance the gospel?
Yeah, really.
Not under Jesus Christ's gospel, no.
I really wonder at what point Luther said that, because, you know, he had become a monk, and at some point he made a journey to Rome, thinking that this was going to be a highlight of his ministry experience. And he got there, and after he saw what he saw, he left, and he said, if there's a hell, Rome is surely built on it.
Yeah.
You know, so it makes me wonder, was this before that experience where he was like, you know, the church hasn't done anything, you know, that versus like later, it seems like he would be more inclined to believe that, yeah, there was corruption.
Right.
Yeah, this Jesuit, Alfonso Toletani, said that the Pope can kill by a single word, for having received the pasture for the sheep, has he not received the right of cutting the throats of wolves?
That's crazy.
This Jesuit, Antonio Escobar, said that children are obliged to denounce their parents or relations who are guilty of heresy, although they know that they will be burnt. They may refuse them all nourishment and permit them to die with hunger, or they may kill them as enemies who violate the rights of humanity. And you know, the sad thing is that kind of stuff happened. If you think about St. Bartholomew's massacre, one of the Jesuits that was involved right there had been Edmund Auger, had gave a sermon in Bordeaux describing the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in Paris and Orleans as an angelic execution of divine judgment. He claimed that the judgment would continue in Bordeaux, a prediction borne out by the massacre there several days later.
Sounds like a very angelic execution when you kill innocent children.
So twisted.
Wow.
You know, I think of some circumstantial evidence for that extreme Jesuit oath. Manuel Sá said that to the tyrant who governs, I can resort to justice if from another source. Someone tyrannically governing a justly acquired domain cannot be deprived of it without a public trial. Once sentence has been passed, however, anyone can execute. He can also be deposed by the people, even those who have sworn obedience to him, if he does not want to be corrected by warning. But he who seizes tyrannical power, any one of the people may kill him, for he is a public enemy of the people. So the question you got to ask here is, who determines whether or not someone is a just ruler?
It's not anything biblical.
Yeah.
It's all based at whoever's on the top.
Yeah,
They're
exactly.
the ones who say. Now, it looks like you have a character from Assassin's Creed down there in the corner.
Yeah, it definitely, I had to include that because, you think about Assassin's Creed, who does that best represent? And when you look back in history, these guys kind of fit the bill. I feel like
very similar.
Yeah. So, and there's a lot of, stuff, allusions to that, some of the societies and whatnot in that game. Now, regarding homosexuality, Jesuit Antonio Escobar also said that clerics who commit the crime of sodomy do not incur the penalty of the bull if it is not exercised more than 2 or 3 times. So, he also, Manuel Saw went on to state that to copulate before the marriage blessing is either no sin or is a slight sin, but it is also expedient if marriage is delayed a great deal. Definitely teaching stuff that is
They're just making concern. It up as they go.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All the names which the scriptures are given to Christ, whence it appears that he is above the church, all these same names are given to the Pope. Now, claiming the names of Christ, if the Pope's doing that, is that a fulfillment of 2 Thessalonians 2?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, claiming to be above God.
Mm-hmm.
He went on to state that the Catholic Church, this is actually Cardinal Bellarmine, teaches that every virtue is good and that every vice is evil, but if the Pope should err in commanding vices or forbidding virtues, the Church would be bound to believe that vices are good and virtues evil unless he wished to sin against conscience.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting statement.
It reminds me of the Decretum Gratiani Distinctio 40 that Martin Luther had a problem with, where basically it said that the Pope could lead the entire world to hell and no man may judge him.
Wow.
So,
yeah. He is above God, above judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And they have a philosophy, the end justifies the means.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, there's no morality in that. And I think it's a very frustrating philosophy that people propagate. But it makes sense if you look at their oath. It's just like, we're going to do whatever it takes to accomplish whatever our goal is. And we are justified in doing it.
Yeah, this Jesuit here said that it's a new privilege that Christ added through the sacrament. One may be justified without love. I mean, that flies in the face of the love chapter. Yeah,
and
exactly.
Just don't question any of it. Just do it.
Yeah. They went on to say things like this: it is lawful to use knowledge acquired with the help of a demon.
Ooh.
I mean, that's Escobar right there. And there was a question that was asked Antonio Escobar that, servants may secretly steal from their masters as much as they judge their labors to be worth. And he said, if for some reason they cannot obtain equality in court independently, they could compensate themselves extrajudicially in secret.
It's just lawlessness. That's all it is. It's lawlessness. It's just saying, do whatever you have to do in any situation, and it's fine.
Yeah, and then also that they want to even use demons to do that. So that this really shows the lawlessness.
It's not Christianity.
Yeah, the demonic stuff. Who are they serving?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the witchcraft and everything that you were mentioning before, it's right there.
Yeah, and it gets even worse. Isaiah 8:20, we read, to the law and to the testimony, if they speak not according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. Mm-hmm. But this particular one, Petra Alagona, said that if God says to murder, rob, and fornicate, it is our duty.
Whoa.
This is what I mean. We were talking about earlier that they put tradition over the Bible. Right? And this is why it was called the Dark Ages, because they withheld all of the scriptures from the common people and said, well, only the clergy of the church can interpret the Bible, which was in Latin, which was not the language of the people.
Which means the clergy can tell you what it means based on what they want it to mean.
They can take it out of context.
Yes.
Yeah. This one right here, Richard Arsdecken, suggested that if anyone consults the stars, the divination may be devoid of all sin. And, to that end, we can see that acceptance of astrology reflected. Jean Dixon, American psychic, said, as a child, I was taught Chaldean astrology by a wise and wonderful man, a Jesuit priest, Father Henry. I don't see how anyone can say that astrology was wrong. After all, he was a man of God.
course.
These were her predictions in 1985. She was well known as a psychic. And, they promoted things like murder for those who injured honor or covered up infamy, covered with infamy before persons of distinction. Not only is it lawful to offer or accept a duel, but you may secretly kill a calumniator. So there's that idea of secretly killing somebody, assassination, if you have no other mode to avoid the danger, because it is not murder but self-defense.
So where's the
love your enemies, bless those who...
Where's that? But also when they talk about murder being premeditated, like that is not self-defense. That is actually murder.
Yeah. They said things like male causes of lust, male rapes are not subject to ordinary law punishment. Or things like if a man becomes a nuisance to society, the son may lawfully kill his father. Very, very much shows how far they went. Now, this is a quiz right here. See if you guys can remember the scripture text here. Taberna says that the girl does not sin if, due to obvious danger of death or great infamy, she does not drive away the rapist, but merely tolerates intercourse. And this proposition is held by more than 50 authors. You guys remember in what the Bible says about that? If you're under attack, what did you have to do?
You had to call out.
Yeah. Deuteronomy 22, verse 24, there was a command that, the woman had to cry out for help and at least make that attempt.
So in this case, what they're saying is like, well, if you're being raped as a woman, you just go through with it and tolerate it and just say nothing and pretend like everything's fine.
Yeah.
Sounds very normal to me. Not really.
Yeah. This particular Jesuit, Clary Bonarchius, said this particular poem right here, just kind of, to me, it strikes me as a little bit perverted, where he's comparing the breasts of Mary and the blending of milk with Christ's blood as this cordial that a sinful soul can take. Is blasphemous.
Why does it sound so? Yeah, I was about to say, this sounds so occult to me.
Yeah. This Jesuit right here spoke about suicide and talked about, for the Stoics have maintained that self-destruction in our country's cause is honorable. They took a very, very different position on suicide. This one, Antonio Casnetti, said, do what your conscience tells you to be good and commanded. If through invincible error you believe lying or blasphemy to be commanded by God, blaspheme.
Wow.
Oh, okay. So familiar spirits that seem familiar to you but are telling you to do certain things and get into your head, that's really Satan and his demons, you'll just do it.
We could shorten that. Do what thou wilt.
Okay. Yeah.
Do what thou wilt to be the whole of the law. So there's no moral standard.
There's no moral standard.
Yeah.
That's true.
This one said right here, this was actually Blaise Pascal, who was a Catholic opposed to the Jesuits. He wrote up Leonard Lessius, who made this statement, where Lessius stated in Article 4 of his Precepts on the Decalogue, women do not sin mortally who offer themselves to be viewed by the young men by whom they believe to be shamefully lusted after. So it was okay to aid and abet fornication to that degree. Very much a concern and more evidence of the man of sin. Now, this book, for anybody who's interested, back in the 19th century, it was written by a 32nd degree Freemason called the Engineer Corps of Hell, or Rome Sappers and Miners, and it has all kinds of additional quotes in English from the Jesuit casuists. For example, this one down here, can a woman occasion an abortion? And he gives some examples right up here where if a young woman has been seduced and she repents of her young adultery, she can, before the fetus is animated, for fear of losing her honor, which is more precious than her own life, commit abortion. So, yeah.
That's going to get a lot of Christians angry, and I hope it does. I hope that people, if you're looking at this at home, I hope you're seeing there's something really scary going on, and this is just fact upon fact upon fact.
So this is an entire book of situations where you can actually go against the word of God for any reason.
Yeah, this particular book was written by a 32nd degree Freemason. He was protesting some of the Jesuits. What a lot of people don't know, though, is at the very top, it was said that back in the 19th century that the leader of the Freemasons was ultimately the Pope. They were connected at the very top, but
I could see that.
Worked together as sort of a Hegelian dialectic. As you said, two secret societies kind of warring against each other for the same end.
Right.
It's like they're writing the manual on situational ethics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what casuists actually was referring to as cases. What you could do in a specific case and twist the law of God.
Yep.
Now, one of the examples that we find of the sort of assassination they did, an interesting story back in the 19th century. This is Charles Chiniquy. He was a priest who converted to Protestantism, wrote a book called 50 Years in the Church of Rome. Incredible book. I recommend it.
It's awesome.
But he wrote about, one of the things was his lawyer who defended him was a young Abraham Lincoln. And he warned Lincoln that later on, he had not made friends with the Jesuits in defending this priest, and that they were going to seek his life. And, later on, we find that all of the Catholics involved in the conspiracy to kill Abraham Lincoln, they were all Catholic, and one of them, the leader John H. Surratt, was tracked to Rome in the Pope's private army in the Zouaves, and that was his papal uniform right there. Wow. You can see. So there was some question about some involvement. And in 1922, the suppressed truth about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln by Burke McCarty, you can read about all the details of that. Now, mind you, this is 1922. She says in that book that the next step in the Vatican's great scheme is to make war between this country and Japan after the latter country has been placed under full dominion of the Jesuits. So they wanted to get back into Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And what do we find a few years after 1922? Pearl Harbor.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah.
So there's a quote by Abraham Lincoln where he says the war, referring to the Civil War, would never have been possible without the sinister influence of the Jesuits. And then also Samuel Morse, the one who invented Morse code. He also said the Jesuits are a secret society, a sort of Masonic order with super added features of revolting odiousness and 1,000 times more dangerous.
There was another priest in 1913, Jeremiah Crowley, who wrote about the Pope, chief of white slavers and high priest of intrigue, who said that Rome is now egging on Japan to annex Mexico, seize on the Philippines, on Hawaii and Alaska, and wipe out the United States. Now, this is 1913, and again, long time before Pearl Harbor took place, but it looks eerie when you look back through the lens of history. World War II, there's a lot of concerning things about World War II. One of the things that we read from Rausching, head of the Danzig government in 1939, was that Hitler stated, "I learned much from the order of the Jesuits. Until now, there has never been anything more grandiose on the earth than the hierarchical organization of the Catholic Church. I transferred much of this organization into my own party."
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Walter Schilling, former chief of Nazi counterespionage, indicated that the SS organization constituted by Himmler according to the principles of the Jesuit order, their regulations and spiritual exercises prescribed by Ignatius of Loyola were the model Himmler tried to copy exactly.
Exactly. Wow.
Yeah. And Franz von Papen himself said that the Third Reich is the first power which not only recognizes but which puts into practice the high principles of the papacy in Der Völkische Beobachter, January 14th, 1934.
I find that very interesting because on the outside, you would never think that Hitler and his organization had anything to do with Catholicism.
Right?
Right? They did not come across as Christian, if we could call Catholicism Christian.
But they did share a mutual disgust for Israel.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay.
The Inquisition. Think about the Inquisition. There were a lot of Jews that got persecuted in the Inquisition. And Rome just continued that. In fact, the idea of gold stars that were in Germany, that goes back to councils in Rome long before that, that prescribed that the Jews had to wear an identifying feature. And they also had to live in cities in specific ghettos. So
yeah, and they did that for other people groups too. I mean, the Jews, they got the gold stars, the two triangles opposed to each other. But there were other groups that had other types of badges. Some triangles and squares and things like that.
What I find interesting is that if they were saying that they're very much inspired by the Catholic Church and putting those practices into their system, but on the outside, they didn't look Christian by any means, nothing about Jesus or God or anything, then what were they inspired by? Clearly, the only parallel you see is of the Jesuit order, right? Well, and the violence and occultism. And the swastika was also a part of Hinduism.
Yeah. So, what's their ultimate aims? I think one of the things that I've been seeing here recently is, the encyclical Fratelli Tutti that Pope Francis just recently introduced. This is actually right here a model in the Chiesa del Gesù in Rome by Vincenzo Pandolfi. And it's a model of this mother church, and we've got all of these churches surrounding it here. And I got to ask, how many doors were there in the Old Testament sanctuary?
It was one entrance representing that Jesus is the only way.
Exactly.
One.
Revelation, you see this story about a woman, a harlot, and many daughters. Mm-hmm. And here we have this model of this church with all of these churches around it. And it's very much an ecumenical movement that is uniting with all of these different world religions. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I see right here is there's anger over converting souls. There's this anger over there being an idea of absolute truth, of one true path, but really establishing many roads instead.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and that's what you see too with many of the Protestant, mostly evangelical actually, leaders that will come to the Pope, have discussions with the Pope. And I think it was actually the Lutheran Church that said, the protest is over, we're coming back to the mother church.
We know that the first 1,000 years there was one church, it was called the Catholic Church, and the word Catholic means universal, it doesn't mean Roman. Catholic means, if you're born again, raise your hand if you're born again. You're a Catholic. I've come to understand that diversity is divine. It's division that's diabolic. The Roman Catholic Church and the Protestant Lutheran Church signed an agreement that brought an end to the protest. This brought an end to the protest of Luther. Brothers and sisters, Luther's protest is over. Is yours.
Nei quartieri ci sono famiglie che si vogliono e famiglie che non si vogliono, famiglie che si uniscono e famiglie che si separano. E noi siamo un po', mi permetto la parola, separati. E i peccati ci hanno separati, i nostri peccati. I malintesi nella storia, ma una lunga strada di peccato comunitario. Ma chi ha la colpa? E pregare al Signore perché ci unisca tutti. E avanti, siamo fratelli, ci diamo spiritualmente questo abbraccio e lasciamo che il Signore finisca l'opera che Lui ha incominciato. Perché questo è un miracolo, il miracolo dell'unità è incominciato.
The beginning of the protesting church. Now you really stop and think about it. But among the people of love, we're called protesters. We've been protesting for 500 years, baby. When that church split took place, and that spirit of division sat down on his throne, we've been dividing ever since. You recognize James and Betty Robinson, they're next to Tony, and then Jeff Tunnicliffe. Now Jeff is Secretary General CEO of World Evangelical Alliance. That is one of the largest evangelical associations, if not the largest, in the world. And then down on this other end is John and Carol Arnett, Partners in Harvest in Toronto, Canada. You remember the Toronto blessing? It broke out, those are the pastors, it broke out in their church. And so they were there. And then Brian Stiller, Global Ambassador, World Evangelical Alliance, is the man right next to me there on the left. And then the tall guy in the back is Dr. Thomas Schumacher, Martin Bucer Theological Seminary in Bonn, Germany. Now, take a good look at that picture. The night before, we had a dinner together before we met with Pope Francis the next day. That many evangelicals in one room. Folks, you don't get it.
We ask that you give him eyes to see with hopeful longing the fulfillment of bringing together your bride, the church. Lord God, may it pierce all of our hearts that there is any division in your bride, the church. And Lord, we just ask you to inspire our hearts in every way to overcome every obstacle, every prejudice, every misunderstanding, every shortcoming, and that we would see in each other brothers and sisters longing to be faithful to your Son.
The glory that the Father had, he gave to Jesus. The glory was the presence of God. What is the charismatic renewal? It's when we experience the presence of God. And he said, and I give them the glory, pragmatic reason, so that they may be one. It's the glory that glues us together, not the doctrines. It's the glory. If you accept that Christ is living in me and the presence of God is in me and the presence of God is in you, that's all we need. Because God will sort out all our doctrines when we get upstairs. Therefore, Christian unity is the basis of our credibility, because Jesus said until they won, they will not believe. The world will not believe, as they should, until we are one. Division destroys our credibility. It is fear that keeps us separated, because fear is false evidence appearing real. It's an acronym. FEAR, false evidence appearing real. Because most of your fear is based on propaganda.
Yeah, their goal of destroying the Reformation has almost been completed in the majority of the Protestant world. The question is where are those real Protestants today who still oppose this system, who still haven't swerved from the position of the Reformers, hundreds of years ago, and still uphold truth?
Wow, I'm really glad you came, James, because I knew a little bit about the Jesuits from, maybe we can now hold up the book, The Great Controversy. Again, historical facts. What James presented, a lot of that is also in The Great Controversy, which you can get in many places and even online for free. And I would highly recommend you read this, because many lives have been changed by it, but people reading the book and realizing, whoa, there is something more happening behind the scenes.
And I'll add just right there, please go read The 50 Years in the Church of Rome by Chineke. It is amazing. Yeah. It changed my whole perspective.
Yeah, definitely. James, thank you so much for coming today. James has his YouTube channel, Biblical Hope. Please go and support him and subscribe. I'm subscribed, and he has awesome content out there. Again, historical Christian history, and just showing you, as he did here today, fact. And he does not play around with it. He just tells you the straight up truth. And I want the straight truth. I want to know what's going on, because as the Bible says, the truth shall make you free. So thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and subscribe and comment. It helps get this video out in the algorithm so more people can see it. Share it with your friends, your family, share it with people who need to know. Also, if you want to support us financially, we really appreciate that. You can do so at patreon.com/LittleLightStudios, or you can go to lls.tv/give. And in fact, if you give in our website, we get the full amount. Patreon does take a cut. And also, we've got t-shirts. Keith wearing one right now. We've got t-shirts on our website, lightwear.shop, and you can wear your witness by wearing Christian merchandise. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
If you're looking for good, wholesome, educational content for your children, subscribe to our new channel, Little Light Kids. It's proven that people remember things that they see more than what they hear. Lightwear believes the best way to share your witness is to wear your witness. Lightwear has all kinds of graphic tees that are a great attention-grabbing way to share the gospel. So head on over to lightwear.shop and check out all the cool graphic tees. What do you want people to remember when they see you?
Do you have questions about the Bible that you've been struggling to find the answers for? Video Bible Study, or VBS for short, is a YouTube channel that answers your Bible questions in 5 minutes or less. Check out these easy to understand, comprehensive videos talking about everything from what happens when you die to why does God allow suffering. Make it your goal to deepen your relationship with Christ this year and subscribe to Video Bible Study on YouTube to help you along your journey.